On a sunny day, on the 29th of August 1632, a small boy was born. He got the name John Locke. He grew up in a beautiful little cottage in Rington to a happy family. His father was an attorney and both his parents were Presbyterians. Wait, father, who are these men? We will come back to John Locke, but we first need to understand how and why the English Parliament got power, so that the liberal movement that we today associate with John Locke could be created. The English Parliament had since its establishment in 1215 grown, and it became more and more powerful. A Presbyterian movement of radical Calvinists also got power, and they opposed the English state church. King James I and his successor, King Charles I, who are Arminians, started seeing a religious divide, which started to dwindle their chances at having a loyal parliament. Presbyterians, like most Calvinists, also opposed the lavish lifestyles that the royal family was used to, and this further irritated the royal family. A liberal movement also started to form, that wanted Parliament to gain power and change the monarchy from an absolute monarchy into a constitutional monarchy, which meant that the king could only exercise power over some issues within certain frameworks and limits imposed by Parliament. These new parliamentary groups started to undermine James I's power over raising an army, collecting taxes, and his dreams of absolute power and a full union of the British Islands met hard resistance from Parliament. You might wonder what the British Parliament had to do with collecting taxes, but even the Parliament had no binding powers and could be dissolved by the king at any time. The tax collectors and the petty landowners, also called the gentry, could object, which would hinder an easy stream of money coming to the king. This meant that the king could live an adequate life at peace, but if war ever broke out, he would be forced to summon Parliament to ask for more money. King James I's peaceful temper kept him in power, but when his successor, King Charles I, started trying to reform the country, things went south. First, his new French Catholic wife, Henrietta Maria, decided that the Pope was better and kept her Catholic faith. Then, the unpopular favourite of the king, the Duke of Buckingham, caused a fiasco when trying to save the French Protestants, or the Huguenots. His financials also went red, which forced him to reopen Parliament. To get his money, he was forced to sign the Petition of Right, which obliged him to follow the Magna Carta. After this, he avoided recalling Parliament for 11 years, the so-called personal rule of Charles I, or the 11 years of tyranny. These 11 years were marked by the economic struggle which forced Charles to find other ways of earning an income, but when he followed in the footsteps of his father and tried to unite the churches of Scotland and England, the Scottish rebelled. The new books from back at the priests and violent protest broke out in the streets, and the Scots also formed an army to force the king to accept the independence of the Scottish Church and to end this new unified state church. But with standoff and war favoured neither the Scottish nor the king's side, and a truce, the pacification of Berwick, was formed. But the king wanted to institute a national state church, so he was forced to summon Parliament to raise money for a new, even bigger army to defeat the Scots. But Parliament's hostility proved too much, and he was forced to dissolve Parliament only after a few weeks. The war continued in the mid-1640s, but the royal army was defeated and the king was forced to accept the independence of the Scottish Church and pay reparations. But nevertheless, a new parliament was formed, and they didn't wait with the demands after the king's disastrous war, and the bad news were delivered by one of the king's strongest supporters and advisors, the Earl of Strafford. "My king, I have a message from Parliament." "What now? Not again." "They say that you must summon them every 3 years. You can't dissolve Parliament. All taxes must be approved by Parliament, and all your ministers are, from now on, to be under scrutiny by Parliament." "No, they can't force me to accept this. I'm the king." "I totally agree, my king. Gods, what are you doing? We are arresting His Excellency the Earl of Strafford for treason." "Stop it. Who gave the order?" "Parliament, my king." The Earl was taken to the Tower of London, and he was later charged with treason and was executed. That was the last straw for the king, and he decided to seize control by arresting 5 of the most prominent members of the opposition in the new parliament. But the attempt at regaining power by capturing the 5 parliamentarians failed, and the parliament wasn't intimidated. This forced the king to flee north for his and his family's safety. Battle lines were drawn when negotiations between the king and parliament broke down. The Royal Navy and coastal cities generally favoured parliament, while rural areas favoured the king. As the brutal war grew, most people were forced to join either the parliamentarian or the royalist cause, and the ones that didn't could suddenly face the wrath of both armies. The war started with both sides trying to gather support and build an army. The first major battle was the Battle of Edgehill, and neither side scored a clear victory. But the royalists won a clear victory during the Battle of Adwalton Moor and took control of Yorkshire. The war in the south also went well for the royalists, and they scored many victories. But the turning point came at the defeat of the First Battle of Newbury. Things quickly went downhill, and when Parliament got support from the Scots, things looked really bad for the royalist army. The Scots and the parliamentarians together defeated the royalists at the Battle of Marston Moor. The king had some luck in southwest England at the Battle of Loswithiel, but his forces were then quickly destroyed after 2 defeats at the Battle of Naseby and Longport. After this, the king fled to a group of Scottish Presbyterians for shelter. They betrayed him and gave him to Parliament, where he was imprisoned. But Parliament faced a dilemma after their successful war against the king. What should they do about him? Should they simply remove him, or should they let him keep his crown? How would you approach Parliament if you were King Charles? Comment down below and please subscribe and like the video.